my interest in mosses started with some workshops with Will Schofield, late Will Schofield from UBC, a internationally renowned biologist. And one of the first workshops he held was actually on Chilliwack Mountain at the Hillkeeper Preserve, Pat and Paige Woodward's property, which now I think is a regional park. But so it's like I'm coming, that was about 20 years or 25 years ago or something. So I'm sort of coming full circle here. Yeah, and if you can't hear me, tell me to speak up. I'll try to talk this way. And so yeah, we start with a poem here. But he, the man of science, of science and of taste, sees wealth far richer in the worthless waste, where bits of lichen and a sprig of moss will all the raptures of his mind engross. That reminds me of an individual here, Will Schofield, who I mentioned, who was a prof at UBC, and who I got interested in mosses with and hooked on mosses. So he was a wonderful person and very generous in his knowledge and time. I had the opportunity to get out with him a few times, which was really great. This was near Hope along the Fraser River. So imagine a Monet without color or a forest without trees. Imagine a world without mosses. And through this talk, I'll attempt to sharpen your focus on these ubiquitous, beautiful, and fascinating plants. Hopefully by the end of it, you'll be enraptured. So what do you think of when you think of mosses? And does anyone recognize this spot? This spot was actually mentioned earlier in the evening as a place you didn't quite know when it would be free. So Island 22, this is along Fraser River. Just the sand and the rocks along the shoreline, but it's a beautiful assemblage of mosses there. So yeah, what do you think of when you think of mosses? I'm not sure.
Not that.
If you think of mosses soiling your picturesque lawn. And these are the mosses soiling your picturesque lawn, or most likely, this is one species that's very common. But I think it's more attractive than the blades of grasses that are actually there. Or do you think of mosses destroying your roof or making your driveway an unsightly tripping hazard? That's my roof, our roof, and a driveway, by the way. So I encourage mosses as much as I possibly can. So you've probably given thought to what the mosses, how to get rid of the mosses, but maybe not a lot of thought to the bryophyte, the group to which mosses belong. But hopefully we'll fix that and your desire to get rid of them, if you have such a desire. Not being naturalists, maybe you don't. So I assume you probably don't. So what are the bryophytes? The bryophytes include mosses, liverworts, and hornworts, not an official scientific grouping. But so chances are in your lawn, you certainly have mosses, you might have liverworts, you probably don't have hornworts, unless you're really lucky. They're rare and they're not, I've never seen them around here. Yeah, together bryophytes make up about 20,000 species worldwide. So they are everywhere. There's no avoiding them. From a distance, it might look like just a bunch of green stuff. It has a pleasant upholstery of greenness. But when you get up close, it might look something like this. So you see the mosses on the left have these leaves that kind of wrap around the stem. Liverwort, this is one type of liverwort. It looks like a big sort of pancake, or maybe like a lichen, a peltigera lichen, the flat mass. And then the hornworts have these spiky horn things. So before introducing and talking more about those groups, let's back up a bit. The bryophytes are an ancient group. They arose about 400 million years ago from green algae, the liverworts, mosses, and hornworts, and then vascular plants came after that. Just to give you an idea of how things are broken up here, the mosses are part of the phylum Bryophyta. Liverworts are Mercantiophyta, and hornworts are Anthroceratophyta. And then further to that, this isn't just to confuse you, but give you an idea of the diversity and the splitting of the groups, particularly the bryophytes. So you have the Tachycia, which is oddball moss. We'll see a picture of that later. And sphagnum, of course, the peat mosses, lantern mosses, elytricum mosses, which you probably have seen, and all a bunch of the rest of them, which comprise or contain about 95% of them. And next to flowering plants, the bryophytes represent the largest number of species. So that's about 20,000, 18 to 20,000, as I mentioned. The vascular plants, there are about 300,000. So it's quite a bit less, but still a big chunk of plants. So worldwide, you might have about 11,000 species of mosses, 7,000 liverworts, and only 220 hornworts. In B.C., we have 808 species. These numbers vary every year. Things are being reclassified, new species are being discovered, etc. So this is an approximation, but the relative abundance of each, or contribution of each, is similar, appropriate. So 800 or so mosses, liverworts, 237, and only 4 hornworts. All the hornworts are listed of conservation concern. They're limited distribution. They're just not many around. So, and liverworts, you notice here I've broken it up. So the thallus liverwort we saw the picture of before, the big pancake-like thing, and then leafy liverworts, which look more like mosses, and we'll explain the differences. But the leafy liverworts contain more, or have more, contribute more species to liverworts than the thallus liverworts. So of this approximately 1,049 species of bryophytes, it doesn't seem like a heck of a lot compared to the 18 to 20,000 worldwide. But when you look at B.C., we have the most bryophyte species of any province. 75% of the species in B.C. are known to Canada. We have 75% of those known to Canada, and 23% of the bryophytes in B.C. are found nowhere else in Canada. So this is the place to be if you're into bryophytes. Worldwide, just to give you an idea of the numbers of species worldwide, the red represents the greatest concentration of species, greatest species richness. And so you see Central America, India, etc. And yeah, and then the mosses sort of follow a similar trend. This is also species richness. So the black areas are the areas of greatest number of species. So they're ancient and successful, but what else makes them special? Here are some common features amongst the 3 different groups. They don't produce flowers or seeds. They don't have roots. They don't have vascular tissue like regular plants, xylem and phloem for conducting nutrients and water. And they don't have lignin, so they're not rigid structures. So how the heck did they survive without these things? So the first part, they don't produce flowers or seeds, but they do produce spores through sexual reproduction, and vegetatively, through asexual vegetative reproduction, they fragment the chunks of leaves or a special structure called gemmy, which are just balls of tissue, basically, that might fall in an area that is conducive to growth, and then it'll grow. Same with fragmentation. All mosses can reproduce through fragmentation, but there's not all mosses are reproducing sexually. Not all mosses, and populations of mosses will have male and female sexual organs. So water is required. It's important for sexual reproduction for the sperm to reach the egg, whether or not the male and female are in separate plants, or the male and female are on the same plant. You still need water for the sperm to swim over to the egg. So it's a good example here of all these liverworts and mosses along this creek. No shortage of water. So in sexual reproduction, this gametophyte, this bottom leafy bit, if it has a female organ and that organ gets fertilized by the sperm, then it produces a sporophyte, which consists of the stalk and the capsule. The capsule is the thing that holds all the spores. An example is spores of a species. You see here they're very small. It's I think 15 microns, which is 0.015 millimeters. But spores are useful for identification of some species, the size and the ornamentation on the surface. You can sort of see those little bumps on the surface of these, and there may be striations or something, but that might help you in identifying species. So the spores or the fragments fall into an area that's moist and appropriate for the moss development. The first stage is it develops this filamentous green algae-like looking substance, and from there it produces the gametophyte, which is the green part that we see all the time, the leafy part of the moss, in this case, the moss. And it'll stay as a gametophyte without producing the sporophyte, the stalk and the capsule, if it's reproducing just vegetatively and doesn't have sexual organs or it doesn't get fertilized, or will develop the sporophyte if the sperm fertilizes the egg. And as we saw before, we have the sporophyte at the top, the stalk and the capsule, and gametophyte at the bottom, and then the capsule opens up and releases the spores. An example, a real life example, we have the capsule and the stalk at the top and the green leafy bit at the bottom. So there are three means of reproduction: sexually through spores, and through gemmy, the specialized structures, and through fragments of the plants, either breaking off of leaf or tissue, or some species have whole sections of the plant that are deciduous, and they do the same thing. They break off and fall into an area that is conducive to growth, and they produce another plant. An example here of the gemmy, this isn't a fairly common liverwort. You may have seen, it's got this odd red color here, so it's usually more green, but it's got these little cups, splash cups, which you might be familiar with in lichens and cladonia, but you see within the red splash cup, you see the green tissue. Those are the gemmy. So if a raindrop falls in that splash cup, it'll splash the gemmy out, and it'll land and hopefully grow somewhere. The mosses also produce gemmy. This isn't a good example. This is kind of an atypical example. There are mosses that typically produce gemmy. This moss, Orthodicranum toricum, it's known for its vegetative reproduction. So it forms these mats. It's quite a common moss around here, dark green mat. And if you rub your finger across the top, it'll break all the tips off. The tips fragment very readily. But this particular plant, I hadn't seen it before, and I think it's quite uncommon, has developed gemmy at the tip of it instead of just relying on fragmentation. This was a specimen from Sumas Mountain. And then here's an example of the deciduous chunks of moss that break off. This is in the genus Campylopus. They're known for a lot of those species. They have these deciduous things same like the fragments from the gemmy, they just break off and they fall into a good place, or transported there by animals, and they'll develop a new plant. So the bryophytes don't have roots. They have rhizoids. See at the bottom there, they look a lot like roots, but roots are roots because they have conductive tissue for transporting water and nutrients. The rhizoids of the mosses and liverworts don't. They just strictly use their purpose to adhere to the surface. But they're quite dense and compacted together, so that the water is probably wicked and upwards into the plant from the rhizoids, but not internally in the structure. So they don't have vascular tissue like the regular plants, and not just the roots, but in the stem as well. There are a few species that do, but often sphagnum, actually, we'll see pictures of that later. The structures, some of the branch leaves help facilitate the movement of water upwards, so wicking upwards. Yeah, so they absorb nutrients and water through the leaf tissue, not through the internal conductive tissue, because they don't have that except for a few of them. They dry out very quickly. They're sort of dependent on the moisture in the environment. So they'll hydrate and dry out quite quickly. They can dry out completely and then hydrate when the water is available. So without the need to require nutrients and water from soil and their ability to tolerate great changes in moisture, they can grow pretty much anywhere. That's an example here is this bare rock and dry face. This is along the west side of Okanagan Lake, so it gets very hot there. But these things persist. An example is an old pickup truck. There's probably a bit of dirt that it's underneath the moss there, but it doesn't need that as all it's doing is adhering to the surface and getting nutrients from runoff and dust, and so they can occur pretty much anywhere. So they don't have lignin to produce woody tissue, so they can't grow too tall in our area. They might go 3 or 4 inches tall. I think the tallest one in the world, there's a Dawsinii or something from Malaysia it grows 0.3 to half a meter tall, apparently. So let's have a closer look at the mosses. The characteristics are they're leafy. The leaves usually are arranged around the stem. They're not in like one plane or in rows. Some are, but generally they aren't. They have a midrib line down the middle of the leaf. Leaves aren't lobed, so they're like one leaf structure. They're not lobed like that. The leaves aren't split. And they have complex sporangium, or the capsule, which I'll explain. There are a number of components of the capsule to store and expel the spores from within, which contrasts to the liverworts, which are just basically a sac that contains the spores. It's much more simplistic. Here's a photograph of a common local moss, a big robust thing you'll see along forest trails and shady areas, but it exemplifies the arrangement of leaves all the way around the stem of the plant, and the fact that the leaves aren't lobed. These photographs are from Des Callahan, an English biologist, consulting biologist who travels the world and takes pictures and studies mosses. They're available at this website. You can go there and look at all the different places he's been and the fantastic pictures he's taken. Just to give you an idea of the diversity of moss leaves and the key features you see in here, there's no, as I say, they're not broken up into lobes, they're not split, they're one solid leaf. And the midrib, the line down the middle, they're present in all but a few. The top right there, D, it doesn't really have, some do, but some don't have the midribs, but characteristically they do have midribs. And their midribs could be double or different shapes or different lengths. And some mosses are creeping and others are upright. The creeping mosses tend to have the capsule or the sporangium, just going to find the pointer. So you notice here that the sporophyte develops from the terminus of the upright moss, but on the creeping moss, it'll pop out of here somewhere. This doesn't show that, but this is a common Homalothecium. It's fulgescens. It's common on big leaf maple. A nice, shiny, robust moss you can find here. But the creeping mosses they'll grow pretty much anywhere on vertical and horizontal surfaces, rock, bark. But the upright mosses are more confined to vertical surfaces, so you won't find them on trees and other vertical surfaces. this is that oddball Tachycia when I showed you the list of different groups within the mosses. Tachycia was one of them. They only figured out that this was a moss fairly recently. It was thought to possibly be a liverwort, but there are no one's ever found sporophytes on this species. So it reproduces by these odd cylindrical leaves breaking off, and so it reproduces asexually, vegetatively. It's found in hypermaritime areas of Haida Gwaii, northern Vancouver Island, Nobody Plateau, but it's confined to those areas. And so the sporophyte, the stalk and the capsule, the stalk and mainly, I guess, is rigid and persistent in the mosses, and it develops after the capsule develops after the stalk lengthens. The stalk grows up, and then the capsule starts maturing, and then opens up. And that's different than the contrast to the liverworts. The capsule develops first when it's near the base of the plant, and then it's suddenly pushed up with the stalk, which is actually just a water-filled thing. So it doesn't persist like this moss structure. It usually, when the capsule ruptures or explodes and releases the spores in the liverwort, then the stalk will just fall down. And you'll often see, if after that happens, you'll see a bunch of these white thread-like things on the surface of the gametophyte plant at the base. So that's when you know it's a liverwort. So in the mosses, I mentioned they have a complex sporangium or capsule. And here's a capsule with you see these teeth-like things at the top, and the lid is just popped off, so that it's expelled the spores. But these teeth like structures at the end, when it's wet, they move into the chamber of the sporo or sporangium or the capsule, and when it's dry, they fold back out again, and thereby shoveling out some of the spores, just to assist in the distribution of spores. The bottom left is another example of the same sort of thing, but this has two sets of teeth. The inner ones basically are just holding the spores from all piling out at once, and then the outer ones are the hygroscopic ones, the ones that are moving in and out and doing the same thing. And then the spores are expelled. Well, this I found recently, moss grows everywhere, but most people don't even notice it. It was an interesting quote from a movie. I've been looking for this movie for a while. I heard about it because it features a bryologist. It's the only movie I've known that has a bryologist. There's a Romanian. It takes place in Brussels, I think, in Belgium, and a Romanian construction worker befriends a Chinese Belgian bryologist, and she introduces him to the beauty of mosses. It's kind of a slow art house film, so I enjoyed it. But if you're into more into Marvel shows or something, you might become a bit bored quickly. But I thought it was an interesting observation. Mosses are everywhere. I mean, they're all around us, yet not too many people notice them. So we're out in the field now. I won't try to pronounce the French and reveal how bad it is. My French is. So stalking a moss in Quebec. We're just walking along a trail, and we see something in the distance there, and we get a bit closer. There's this odd white-looking moss, and there's moss around it. So we zoom in a bit closer, and sure enough, it is a moss, but it's kind of odd moss. And this may not be the best example to show you of mosses, but it does exemplify part of the diversity of mosses. So this structure here, you see, it's not lobed. It's one solid structure. The leaves aren't split. And you can't really see the midrib here. And the reason you can't see in this plant, it's a leucobryum, which grows back in Ontario, but not out here. But the midrib occupies most of the leaf. So they only have a bit of the non-midrib tissue on the edges. So it's you can't really tell it doesn't have a midrib. It looks like it doesn't have a midrib, but it does have a midrib. But I would just want to mention while we're on mosses, peat moss or sphagnum. And this is I think this is Vancouver, Northern Vancouver Island. This is you see the red and the yellow and green sphagnum moss below the other plants, Labrador tea and kalmia and cloudberry and stuff, the plants that are specialized plants growing in bogs. So sphagnum's a little different. It's often, you've heard beavers referred to as ecosystem engineers. Sphagnum also is often referred to as ecosystem engineers. And it's actually got proof. This is a UBC engineering class, and there's a sphagnum in the class, so the proof that it is an ecosystem engineer. And sphagnum engineers or modifies its environment to suit itself and exclude other plants. This isn't any dig at engineers in the room, but it does so by storing a lot of water and reducing, so there's reduced amount of oxygen and acidifying its environment. It takes up cations like potassium and sodium, magnesium, and releases hydrogen ions, and thus makes its environment more acidic and more inhospitable to other plants and competitors. It thrives in low nutrient conditions and may receive only rainwater. So a true bog, once I'll show you a picture how the bogs develop, but once the bog does develop and a true bog forms, it's hydrologically isolated from the surrounding water. So it doesn't receive any nutrient-rich water like a fen might, another peatland. But so it's only getting water and nutrients from rainwater and dust and stuff that's blowing in. So the main characteristics, sphagnum, its environment, lack of oxygen, lack of nutrients, and high acidity, which makes it inhospitable to a lot of other plants. A few specialized plants can keep it company. In this picture, you'll see the grassy stuff, I think, is cotton grass, and there's some cranberry and a willow, but mostly it's dominated, of course, by sphagnum. It decomposes slowly, so it grows on top of itself. And thus the sphagnum, which grows thickly together in a dense clump, will just keep growing and growing and growing. It doesn't decompose below. And this illustrates the structure of the mosses I mentioned before, that it wicks water upwards. You can see the spreading branches on the sphagnum, but there's also, you can see some pendant branches, the ones that hang down sort of close to the stem, and they help to wick the water up. So 13,000 years ago, when glaciers came through here and scoured the land, places like Burns Bog or Langley Peat Bog, they created these basins, and they filled up with sand and silt and clay. And eventually, there's more organic material and stuff that fills up these basins. They're kind of isolated, so there's not a lot of nothing flowing in or out of them. So they're just receiving water from rainfall and runoff. And so maybe this might be 3,500 years ago or something. That's when I think the Burns Bog and probably the Langley Bog started forming. And so at that point, the sphagnum, which is represented by the brownish portion here, starts to develop. So sphagnum rolls into this level area, low nutrients, but then it starts to reproduce and then further acidify and grow and isolate that portion of the land from hydrologically from the outside area. So around the outside the periphery, around here you'll get fen area of fen, which is a nutrient rich peatland, organic based. wetland, and but up here, this is all just nutrient poor. This is all sphagnum dominated, and so there are a few other species. This is the key to the sphagnum. It has small living cells which have chlorophyll, these linear things in between these giant water-filled dead cells. And so the water, this is stained. I stained it blue to see the structure, but so normally this would be this green, the thin portion would be green with the chlorophyll, and the would be this clear, the big white, the big white cells. And they're finding now in those big cells, there are quite a few different organisms, including nitrogen fixing bacteria. So the sphagnum itself is being enriched from within, not just from outside sources of nutrients, of which there aren't many. Another Callahan photograph of a sphagnum. You see the top pom-pom-like, that's just new growth called a capitulum. And you'll see the branches spreading off to the right or to the side, and then some of the branches hanging down closer to the stem. Quite a beautiful structure. So yes, sphagnum is very important for climate change. In peatlands, bogs, and fens covers about 3 to 10% of the Earth's surface, but stores about 30% of its soil carbon. So the 3 to 10%, I keep reading and hearing different numbers. So I just put 3 to 10. So that kind of covers. I don't know what the real number is, but the point of it is that there's a pretty small area contributes a huge amount of carbon being sequestered or stored. Stores more than twice the amount of carbon as the world's forest, and Canada has 27% of the world's peatlands. So Canada's pretty important in the climate change scenario. And once the stuff starts to decompose through drainage, degraded, or through temperature increases, etc., then that's releasing all this stored carbon that's released as carbon dioxide through decomposition from microorganisms, and that spells disaster for the world, I suppose. So we'll move on to liverworts. As I mentioned, the thallus liverworts and the leafy liverworts. Some of the characteristics of liverworts: most of the leaves are there. It's two main rows of leaves are sort of on one plane, but often they'll have a small underleaf. So two lateral leaves and then the underleaf along the stem. Not in all of them, but they often look like they're flat. And they have the simple sporangium or capsule, which I mentioned before, just basically a sac full of spores. But they do have, they're not as complex as mosses, but they do have these structures within the capsule called elaters, which are kind of little coiled things that when they dry out, they expand and they help to push out the spores. Another Callahan photograph of a local liverwort that is very common around here. You see the kind of the arrangement of the leaves on two planes, and rather on one plane, and underneath would have the underleaves, and that's a means of identifying the underleaf. The characteristics of the underleaf will help distinguish the Chlorella species. And here you have the stalk and the capsule of the sporophyte. An example of the diversity and structures associated with liverwort leaves. There's no midrib, no center line as you do have in mosses, and you have all these lobes, except for this one here. But there are always exceptions, but in generally they're lobed and without a midrib. And just as a reminder, this is what the moss in contrast looks like. It's not lobed and it has the midribs. So in this case, on the left side, the leaf is lobed, doesn't have a midrib. Right side, unlobed with a midrib. So that's what those are. Well, I mentioned this before. The sporophyte collapses after ruptures. Isn't persistent. You can see here it's kind of squiggly. The capsule has burst open, released the spores, and this is drying up. It's just a water-filled tube, basically. So, and the capsule develops first, and it's raised up. I mentioned, yeah, layers and structures within the capsules that helps to expel the spores. Another thing that a lot of liverworts have are these oil bodies. In this case, these blue things. Um, the function of them isn't really known. It could have something to do with herbivory to prevent it being eaten. But these are characteristic of certain species. So if they the size, the number, in this case, the color of these cells within these oil bodies within the cell will help to determine what species that is. So when you collect these things, you should have a quick look at them before you store them, because when they dry out, these things disappear. So it's important to have a look before or identify them before they dry out. So we're off in the field. This is in Funel, Madeira. Madeira is an island, a Portuguese island off the west coast of Africa. This is basically a big lump in the ocean. On top of that lump is a nice area of highly moist, cloudy forest, I guess, but really great for mosses and liverworts. So we're walking along and we find this big boulder. Zooming in on it, we see this red stuff that kind of looks interesting in the middle. We get a bit closer, and it turns out it's a Frulania, which we have Frulania here, and it looks similar to this red color. If you look at maybe bitter cherry or alder trunks, you'll find it on there. It's a close up. It looks a bit like the Perella that we had a picture of earlier. It's got the scale like leaves on the surface and then under leaves, which we don't see. And moving to that was leafy liverworts. So thallus liverworts are a bit different. This picture was taken, I think, at the experimental forest in Chilliwack. So it was by a creek in this really shady, moist area. And this is Iconocephalum, which is you don't see it a lot, but it's not really uncommon. But in the right areas, you do find it. It's got the things are these big they're air chambers, basically, or gas chambers. So they have this little hole in the middle of this chamber, and that it doesn't open and close, but it passively expels water. I think it's kind of a thick cuticle, but it stores gas. It's space for gas to increase gas exchange for photosynthesis so carbon in and oxygen out. So it allows it to photosynthesize and persist in an area that's very shady and with little light. Also, the chlorophyll of mosses and liverworts apparently is more efficient than some of the chlorophyll found in vascular plants. So it's a bit different now. Over, of course, thousands of years, things have developed. So, talking an aquatic liverwort, thallus liverwort in Langley. At this wetland, we find all this green speckled stuff on the surface of the water. And looking a bit closer, and some of it's stranded on the side in the mud, but interesting looking thing that's floating. And here's a picture of it with that Des Callahan is much better photographer than I am. So, but this is a liverwort that's not too common. You don't find it very often. It's not rare, but it's always exciting to find. And we'll move off along to the hornworts. As I said, there are only about 4 species in B.C. and 220 worldwide, so they're not too common. This again, a Des Callahan photograph. This is from Souk, yeah, on Vancouver Island. And so the hornworts are non-leafy. They're all thallose. They're like these flat structures at the bottom from which these horns arise. The sporophytes are horn-like. They don't have the stalk. There's just the capsule basically that keeps on elongating and producing spores at the top. Another species from the same area, Souk. So in Costa Rica, walking along this grassy area, find an interesting patch of earthen bank and we get a bit closer, start seeing there's some fuzzy looking stuff, a horn-like stuff in there, below which was some liverwort, some thallus liverwort. But we zoom in a bit and we see it is in fact a hornwort. You can see there's a lot of moss in here as well, but it's got the thallus sort of pancake-like base and the horns projecting from the top. And sometimes you can get fooled in the field by different plants. Selaginella is one of them. It's spike moss, I think, is a common name that's applied to Selaginella. But it's when you look at it closely and feel it, it's rigid. It's a vascular plant, but so it's not a moss, but it does appear to be a moss superficially or from a distance. And your club mosses are similar. You see they produce spores and stuff, and at the top of this other structure, much different than that of a moss. It's rigid. It's a vascular plant. At the bottom there, this is knight's plume. This is in northern Alberta, boreal area. This is a fairly common moss there. Quite a beautiful moss, so it's got those plumose, sort of feather-like structures. And this your lichen on the right side there, you're not likely to mistake it from as a moss, but you wonder, it might, if you're not familiar with it, you might wonder what the heck it is. But it's lichen being a combination of fungus and cyanobacteria or blue green algae and other organisms. And then on the bottom left is the sphagnum. And this, I don't know what you'd make of this. You might not, you probably don't think it's a moss, but the moss grows amongst these. There's a slime mold, but it grows in the same areas. And their slime molds come in different forms, but you might ponder what that could be. But yeah, mosses are tough, so they can photosynthesize in temperatures as low as -15 or as high as -40. And they can grow in really hot environments. They can dry out completely and rehydrate. So this is a dune on Savory Island up near Powell River. This is Centrichia ruralis, common moss in these areas. So it's hot, dry, sand doesn't retain any moisture. They dry out really quickly. They have these little hair points on them. A lot of the mosses in open areas you'll find like rock outcrops around here. You'll see it's kind of white and fuzzy looking, and that's these hair points. And it probably assists in taking up trapping and taking up moisture through dew or rain, and rapidly hydrating the surface of the leaf so it can expand and start to photosynthesize. Um, when you have a big mass of this white stuff too, it might serve as a reflective surface and thereby reflect heat and light and reduce evaporation. And also, I mean, you have all these things sticking up, so it produces a boundary layer so that the wind moving across the surface is the velocity is reduced as it passes over these hairs. So velocity is high here above the substrate or above the surface of the moss, but lower down closer to these little things sticking up, it impedes the flow of air and thereby also restricting evaporative water loss. These are not all these things are known or proven. Some of these are conjectural, but they make sense. So you add a bit of water or rain comes along and these things expand rapidly and start photosynthesizing, and then they also dry out very rapidly as well. That's what it looks like up close. So what the heck are bryophytes good for? There's a mouthful here. Bryophytes are important components of various ecological communities and contribute to local nutrient fluxes and global biogeochemical cycles. And a bunch of references cited. So that's sort of a, excuse me, you know, a mouthful of stuff that they're good for. But on a simpler level, we can look at, yeah, before the information pops up, there's a picture of Glen Ryder on Sumas Mountain, Cougar Bluff. He named it because he saw a cougar there. But he'd established a trail up to this point and beyond. So he'd go up there frequently. But you notice under his feet in 2005, there's a great community of moss and vascular plants. These communities on rock outcrops, Chilliwack and Abbotsford, and all these areas are kind of unique. They're sort of only isolated. And they're found in these particular environments, so they're valuable. But unfortunately, this trail became pretty popular. It's known now as the Abbey Grind, though we changed that on Google Maps, so it's still Glen Ryder Trail. But people go up there for exercise, and which is, yeah, it's all good, but they're not really. It was made as a nature trail, so they're but they're trampling everything on whether willfully or unwillfully. It's damaging the environment. And actually, on the below the dug for below there, someone's gone down below this and cut some of the trees, so their view would be maintained. So yeah, Glenn would be horrified. So we talk about what the mosses do. They protect soil, plant roots from heat, maintain soil moisture, stabilize soil and prevent erosion, contribute nutrients. Eventually, as things break down and it traps blowing debris, etc., and all the organisms that are living in there and dying and excreting. And so it allows for the establishment of other plants and contributes to biodiversity. And sphagnum also regulates, as do other wetlands, water by absorbing it and releasing it slowly, and can prevent the rapid melting of ground frost or permafrost. And permafrost is important in the boreal for just maintaining that impermeable layer of water and maintaining the sphagnum and the bog environment above that. So once that starts degrading through heating or drainage, then problems arise, and that environment is basically destroyed. And this is just an example of, well, if you're out it's like this miniature forest. So if you're out in a mossy area, I encourage you to get down on your knees or even on your belly and start looking around. There's a whole forest of an ecosystem of miniature organisms, invertebrates, and microorganisms, and it's quite fascinating and beautiful and diverse. So bryophytes' interactions with animals might include springtails and tardigrades and rotifers living amongst the mosses, and chorus frog or tree frog, whatever they're called now, and Pacific sideband, yeah, and well, Oregon forest snail as well. They all kind of crawl along the mossy substrate. This is a varied thrush nest, so you see the moss rimmed around the outside. And birds will inadvertently disperse moss. They'll get spores or fragments of the plant caught in their feathers or their feet or whatever, and then they'll go fly off to some other place. And if these things fall off their body at that point, then the new plant of that species will develop. So to finish off here, we'll just go through a miscellany of bryophytes, pictures to sort of to express the diversity and beauty of some of the mosses. are out there. Oh, this is a you see in the middle there. This is a Vancouver Island moss parrot. And this is the only known photograph of that animal. It's all blurry, like you see Sasquatch pictures and stuff. But so this is I took that picture, but so you saw it here first. A very rare organism, and this shows you some of the structures and diversity of mosses and liverworts. So on the top left, we have the cross section of a leaf of one type of moss. This is also a cross section of a different type of moss. You see these little structures here called lamellae. They probably help in the increase in photosynthetic area. They might trap gas in here and even water for hydration and for photosynthesis as well. This is the cross section of a moss. This is a midrib here that we saw the line down the leaf of the. But this is I just put this here because this is important for identification of species. So you often have to do cross sections, and you can tell like this plant has on the end of the leaf, edge of the leaf, it's got this multi cell thickness, and it's got these big cells here and smaller cells at the bottom. These characteristics all help in identification. Over here, just an example of moss that's toothed. And there's no midrib, and this lobe, this liverwort. And this is often, it's quite common in mosses too, the papillae, or little bumps of different sizes and shapes on the surface of the plant. I'm maybe not really sure what they're for. The papillae could shade the surface of the leaf, could help in absorbing water quickly. But it's a common feature in some of these plants, especially in open areas, and can be used to help in identification as well. And this is no midrib, it's lobed, so that's a liverwort as well. And this looks a lot like a moss, but this is in the north end of Vancouver Island on the Nawiti Plateau. This plant grows in very wet, moist areas. It's actually a liverwort. It looks kind of like a moss or liverwort here, but you look closer here, you can see it's kind of this hook leaves, but you can't really tell if it's moss or liverwort. So, but if you look at the leaf, it's Herbertus aduncus, which is fairly common in these areas. There's a number of other Herbertus species, but quite a beautiful plant. This might seem puzzling. At first, this is the area at the bottom layer is water. This is liverworts and mosses and a few vascular plants, and then cement. But to give you some perspective, it's a drainage channel along the side of a street in a small town in Japan. So all the liverworts and mosses grow low, close to the water. And this is quite a striking moss that this is from the boreal area. I'm not sure what its status is. There are two species here, the yellow capped one and the red capped one. There's splactum rubrum and splactum luteum is the yellow one. But these are growing out of moose turds. So you zoom in, it's got these. They're very, very beautiful. Apparently, when they're first developing, they're kind of sweet smelling, and then they become quite foul smelling. Yeah, I've never really smelt them. So, but to a fly at least. So flies will buzz around, and these are basically landing pads for the flies. They'll land on there, and they'll get spores from the capsule on them, and then they'll buzz around and fly off, and they'll find a fresh moose turd somewhere and land on there, drop some spores, and another population will form. But they're quite exciting to come across because they're just so unusual and striking. And this is in Japan, in Kyoto. It's a Japanese moss garden. And you looking at that, it's stunning, it's beautiful, but it's also you look around, you see quite a few deciduous trees here. They should be dropping more leaves than what are present on the surface. So how does that happen? Well, how are those leaves removed? Well, this guy, yeah, he's got a stick broom that he brushes all the leaves off and then dumps them in this thing and carts them away. But he's busy all day long doing this. It's just a mossy log in Langley, in the forest in Langley. It's just different shades and different colors. There's moss and liverworts here, including the Brotharella royale, which is a red-listed moss found in Chilliwack, Abbotsford, Langley, but yeah, uncommon. And this is sort of the northern tip of its distribution, its range. So it's rare, but just the colors it's on this log, it's quite beautiful.
Is it both the dark and the light green?
Pardon me?
Is it both the dark and the light green?
The
The rear moss.
there actually, I don't know where. Yeah, I found it when I was there, but I can't point it out here. It's just there somewhere. So I amongst all the liverworts and it's not really distinctive. It's quite small. It's
Restriction site that we go to. And it has a rare moss on it.
okay. It could be the same.
Kind of.
Yeah. Yeah. They're hard to you have to spend some time looking and yeah. Yeah. Most of the light chartreuse kind of stuff is liverwort, but yeah, I can't remember where I found it there. So on this picture, I'm not sure. This is back in Japan, in one of the moss gardens. They have these stone structures that are being covered in moss or complemented with moss. And in Japan, you can buy mossy hedgehog. This is back in Madeira, a higher elevation area. You notice the mist in the background. That's Benita, who's sitting over there, walking along the trail. These trails go along the levadas. Levadas are canals or channels that hug the mountain and distribute the water from these wet areas that drain into these channels and then channel the water all the way down to the lower elevation areas where it's used for agriculture. But the area is just fantastic for ferns and mosses and liverworts. Oops. No, okay. There was something there, but it's not. Huh. Well, somehow that one went missing. This showed a picture of a canal, closer up, but this is a really close up of the Levada canal that transports the water. So you see at the base the water, and then all the mosses and liverworts and beautiful ferns that adorn the sides. This isn't kind of an odd collection of mosses. This isn't Langley, an old stump, but they're just growing kind of weird on tops of these spires of broken stump. And this is in Quebec. It reminded me of I don't know, a bunch of Quebec dancers or something. These are liverworts, the dancing things, Tilidium, and they're in the carpet of dicranum, other mosses and liverworts. A good example of the sporophyte of a liverwort, Des Callahan. You see the white water-filled stalk and the capsule at the top. Back in Japan, I like the sort of texture, colors of this moss beside a creek. We're back fairly local, not Chilliwack, but Sumas Mountain. You'll find this in Chilliwack as well. So you have, this is dicranum, and this moss here is common name is pipe cleaner moss, Rhodidopsis robusta, but it occurs as you're going up Sumas Mountain or as you're going up a mountain here in Chilliwack. you get to a certain point where these things start to show up. They don't occur below a certain area, and it helps you to distinguish a different biogeoclimatic zone too, which is the ecological classification system in B.C. So on top of Sulanaz Mountain, there's this little different geoclimatic zone than the one just below it. But it kind of transition is sort of marked by this the appearance of this pipe cleaner moss. It was quite a beautiful and distinctive moss. And this is a moss growing in, this is in Vietnam, just a creeping moss along the vertical face of a rock. The colors and textures are interesting. Another one, I can't remember, this might have been Vietnam as well. A big plumose type moss, the hypnum type. Another dicratum. And this back in Japan, this is a carpet of moss underneath some maple trees. I didn't arrange the leaves, they just happened to be that way, so I took advantage.
See,
Pardon me?
sorry, do we have that moss here?
Yeah, not the exact species. They're some of that stuff, the green stuff up in the corner. Well, yeah, up in the corner here looks like it could be atricum, which is a common moss we have here along the sides of trails and things, but I'm not really sure. This stuff we don't have. But often, yeah, in these places across the world, some of them are the same species, but most of them are the same genus, but a different species. So closely related, but and similar form. And so I'll end with another poem. The mute bird sitting on the stone, the dank moss dripping from the wall, the garden walk with weeds overgrown. I love them, how I love them all. And when I saw this poem, I thought of another person, as Al Grass, who's I loved all things in nature and was fascinated with them, and so that's the end of this talk. I wanted to end it with Jude and Al, and